So it's time, but I think we're missing over half of your class yet. It's pretty common for that to happen with night classes. We always have people coming in late, getting off work. I was talking to some of the other professors about that this week, and they're like, yeah, we're used to it at this point, but it's just like you don't get the same amount of information if you come late versus coming on time. Hey, Beyonce, you made it, yay. I'm so glad you made it.
Yeah, it's finally started working. Thank you.
I was like waiting today. I was like, she hasn't told me anything yet, so I'm gonna assume she got on.
I'm sorry.
You're fine. I was just worried all day about it.
Yeah, I tried it early this morning and I was
Good,
happy.
good,
Yeah.
awesome. Well, I'm glad you are here.
Yes, ma'am.
Especially since we got some important information that we're going to be going over first off. So like I was saying, those of you that come on time really get the better end of the bargain because we go over important news and information at the very beginning of class. So I would definitely encourage you guys to keep showing up on time. Also because sometimes I don't remember to hit record. Be honest, I forget sometimes. That's like the last thing on my mind to get ready for classes. So yeah, there's always a chance that I might not remember to hit record, which means you won't get the information. First big bit of information is that the Midland College Gallery's art show is officially open today. You might want to check that out just because it'll probably help you on your gallery review that you have later on this semester. You guys will be selecting an artist in an art show that you attended. So the Midland College Gallery show that just opened today would count as an art show that you attended, and you can pick out an artist that you like there and write about their work. And it's a bunch of local artists in this show as well, mostly local. Some of them are from Washington, but most of them are local. So you could probably learn a lot about them and might even be able to get an interview since some of them are Midland College professors, which would definitely help the paper.
I had a question.
Yes.
When you told us that we needed to write our paper about the art gallery, can it be an art museum as well, or does it have to be a gallery?
If you go to a museum, it has to be a special show.
Okay.
You write about the entire museum. Museums will put on special shows. Frequently for special shows, you have to pay for them, so you might want to watch out for that. So like if you go to the Fort Worth Museum or the Dallas Museum, they always have special shows going on, but they usually cost like $5 to go to them.
Oh, okay.
But no, you would not write about an entire museum just because there's way too much going on and way too many different things and time periods. A show or a gallery show is about a specific group of art or artists. So it's less chaos.
Oh, okay. Okay.
More concise. Any other questions before we move on to the next hot topic?
This is a question more related for the censorship.
I'm going to get to that
Okay.
later. Anna, I'm going to bring that up in a second. So if you just wait for a second for that one, that's one of our topics we're going to go over.
Okay, I mean, it's not about that project. Is something that we're trying to get information. Like for you as a teacher, I would like to know if you have like that kind of access, or you know about that kind of web pages.
I guess I'm confused.
For example, we were trying to define if there is a page that can tell us like the statistics of how many, like I don't know how to say it, a percentage of like a regular museums, just nude museums or kids museum, like if I'm trying like what it will be the statistics or the percentage of this kind of museum. I don't know if it's a web page you
There's
as
not museums that just show nudes either just show censored art or uncensored art. Sorry. There's not like a museum that just specifically does those things. So I don't know if you'd be able to find a statistic about it, since you don't usually ever see anyone that does like just a museum over nudes or a museum over censored art. You don't see that in the art world. It's usually a combination of everything when you go to a museum. Like I was telling, who just asked the last question? Anyways, like I was just talking about, a museum has a comprehensive amount of work or artwork. So it's not like you can just pick and choose what you're going to show. Usually they have a good range of everything so that you can find a lot of different stuff there. Moving on to our next major topic, and I might be able to answer your question better in a second when we get to the group project topic. But this is way more important than your group project anyways. You guys have a quiz that opened today and it closes on Friday at midnight. Your quizzes are worth 40% of your grade in this class. So it's a big deal. My goodness gracious, someone just emailed me to tell me they can't find the link that I emailed them. My goodness. No, I'm not even gonna mess with them. They should have tried earlier. I don't have time. Okay. So quiz, it's over chapters 1 through 4. It is 40% of your grade. You do it on Canvas. You submit it on Canvas. Once again, it opened today and it closes on Friday at midnight. So please make sure to do it. It is an hour time allotment on that quiz. You get an hour to do it. There's only 10 questions. You have an hour to do 10 questions, meaning that you should have time to do the questions and check them. Should be fine. Hang on, Eric, I'll help you in a second. The first 5 questions on that quiz are multiple choice. The second 5 questions are short answer. All of the material is stuff that we have covered in class. It's also in your book. It's also in the YouTube video recordings. So there's no excuse for you to come back and say that you couldn't find the information, since you have access to your book, your notes, and the YouTube videos. Should be fine. That being said, if you, for whatever reason, do not do as well as you think you will, or that you would expect to do on this quiz, do not procrastinate in setting up a tutorial time with me. If you do bad, or you don't get the grade that you want, set up tutorials so that we can fix it before it gets worse, okay? My job is to help you succeed and help you learn. If there's something that's not working, we need to go over it and figure out how we can fix it, okay? Don't wait to fix it until the last week of school. It happens every time I teach this class. Someone emails me the day that I have to turn in grades asking me how they can get their C average to an A. You can't do that after all of the grades have already been done. Don't wait, do it now. Figure out how to fix it now. I'm stressing it so much and someone will still do it. They always do. So once again, your quiz open today, due Friday. Please don't miss it. Please don't miss it. It's 40% of your grade. Next big thing is your group projects. Those are due on the 25th. Anyone else have questions about group projects? Hang on one second. sorry, for some weird reason, something strange that has never happened before just happened. Someone added me to another meeting. I don't know how. But anyways, Hannah's like, oh my God, I know. I've never had so many issues with Teams as much as I do with this particular class. It's every week with you guys. I teach on Teams 3 times a day, by the way. So I don't know. I just don't know with you guys anymore. So yeah, group projects due on the 25th. Anna, you're about to ask a question. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, this is not much concern about the thing. It's more about the group.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if I was going to ask you that personally, but if Gupta of Eric, I guess, did he get a hold of you about the group? Because we didn't hear from him, and today I met with Erica, and want to follow about. We want to start because she's gonna have a trip. And if we don't get a hold of him, and I don't see him today so far. So, and if we want to start with a project,
So what that means, and this is for anyone because it happens every time. There's always one person that just doesn't do anything in the group. You guys are going to be grading each other. So if you can't get a hold of him and he's not doing anything, grade him that way. He signed up for this class just like you did. If you can't put in the work, then you have full right and responsibility to grade him as such. But I have a feeling that today he's probably going to be on because he's the one that just got on and added me to a different meeting, and I don't know how. So he is trying to get on. I know.
Well, that was the same with Erica. We're going to meet too with Thailand, but for inconvenience school them, but we already talked to her. So we know that we are on the same page about the decision that we're going for the
I would say
censorship.
go ahead and start working on it.
Okay, because we didn't want to start because if we have that same mind and then he comes with another one, that will change completely the whole thing.
And he can do whatever you're doing at this point because you guys are ready to go, and I don't think he should hold you back at all.
Okay, I just wanted to say that later will not be like him telling that we didn't try to hear his opinion or his decision because he wasn't since the beginning.
This is recorded, so you can just tell him I said that or have him watch the video. Okay. And you're not the only one that's probably dealing with this. There's always, like, every team has at least one person that's always like AWOL. And we are going to have some time this evening to work on some group projects again a little bit and make sure that everyone knows what they're doing. Once again, there are tutorials available. So if you're needing help on your group project or the quiz or anything in this class, set up a tutorial time with me and we can talk about it and go over it. Like I might be able to help Anna and Erica come up with some statistics if I have time to think about it a little bit more. So that would be great for a tutorial time task. But unfortunately, I've had 3 people email me saying they can't get into Teams. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a 5-minute little break. So if you want to talk to your group on the chat right now a little bit to make sure that you're all connected in these 5 minutes that I need, 5 minutes that I need to get these 3 people on, that'd be great. And I'm sorry. I am so sorry that I'm having to do this.
What are we doing again? Sorry. This is Brock.
I think you're muted.
Okay, yeah, I was multitasking. Sorry. I'm actually done now. I got all three of those people taken care of. They will probably never figure out how to get on at this point, though. Okay. Okay, Eric is on. Eric, Erica, and Anna have been trying to get into contact with you for your group project. You need to make sure to get into contact with them before you leave today. Okay?
All right. What'd I miss?
A lot. You missed a lot. Anna, now is the time to talk to Eric. He is online.
Hi, Eric. Well,
Hey there.
last class and the Miss as well, I guess, posted the name of the group. So you are in our group, group 4, with Erica and Tylene. We met today with Erica. Since you were seen here last week, we just get our phone's number. So if you can give me your number by the comments or take my number up so you can text me and I can add you to the group that we are where the girls are with me, so we can go ahead forward with what we're gonna go next for the project.
Very good.
Do you have a paper, something to write my number?
So just to reiterate, Eric, last week you guys got put into your censorship groups. You're in a group with Erica and Anna, and they need your contact information so that you guys can work on your project.
All right. Ready.
Okay, will be 432-978-4877. Just send me a text with your name and I will add you in a group with other girls.
Can you repeat your phone number again, please?
432-978-4877.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, and everyone is now on. Guys, I send out a new meeting link every Friday through email. So if you would check your Midland College email, you would have the link every week. It's the same link every week too. I don't really change the link. I just send out a refreshed email for people that might have accidentally deleted theirs. So just heads up, check your Midland College email and you will have the link every week. Okay. Moving on to finally getting class started. So last week we went over the questions of what is art, and we went over some of the basic principles of art. This week we're going to expand upon those ideas by studying the principles of design, as well as some of the basic ways and concepts of creating art by using lines and colors and all of those things. But before we do that, I've been doing a little practice with my morning classes on analyzing artworks, and they have found it extremely, yeah, you saw her. They found it extremely helpful because they know that in upcoming classes, they will need to analyze artwork for tests and for papers. So we've been practicing with random pieces of artwork that I've found interesting throughout the week. So what we're going to look at is a piece of outsider artwork. Does anyone remember what outsider artwork is? It's one of your vocab terms from last week. Outsider art. Another word for it is folk art or informal art. So if someone's an outsider artist, what does that mean? This is for anyone.
With little or no format training.
Very good. Yes, it's someone with very little or no formal art training. So this is an artwork by a guy named Frank Jones. He was an outsider artist or someone that had no formal art training. He himself was actually a prisoner in a jail near Houston. So what we're going to do is analyze it. Analyzing is pretty simple. It's basically saying what you see in the art and trying to read into the deeper possible meanings of it. So we're going to start off pretty basic, and I'm going to ask someone to unmute and tell us what they think they see.
Butterflies.
Butterflies, yeah, I hear that one a lot. A lot of people say butterflies. Some other people say millipedes, but bug-looking things, right? What else do we see? Someone else.
Birds.
Do what? I didn't hear you. Yeah, maybe. What else?
Fan, like thingies, kind of like semicircle fans.
Kind of. They look kind of like fans, yeah. What else?
Moths.
Shark fin.
Birds.
Please state the obvious, somebody.
I see
It
numbers.
looks like there's a clock.
So there's clocks. There's a couple of clocks in here. What else? What's going on with all of the bug-looking creatures?
They're
I was gonna say,
Y'all trapped.
They're trapped. Whoever said that. Yeah, they're kind of all separated and trapped. So we've looked at what we see and we've picked out some of the different things. Now, because I did tell you a little bit about Frank Jones, how can we relate that to him being a prisoner? We see a clock, we see things separated. How can that relate?
Waiting to be released, I guess.
Yeah, so he has a very long, he actually had a life sentence. So he has a long sentence. Time goes very slowly for people that are in prison. What else?
If I don't know, maybe this is too deep, but I don't know why the colors that represent really strong to the American flag, and if we go for the US, is the freedom. I don't know if that have something to do why he choose the colors of that paint or whatever.
I like your idea. I really wish that's what it meant, but all it was that he got the blue and red colored pencil from the accountant. But I like your idea better. It sounds a lot nicer. So the accountant at the prison would use red and blue colored pencil to balance the books. And they gave Frank Jones a red and blue pencil as well because they had extras. But I like the red, white, and blue symbolism of representing freedom for someone that's in prison. That's very interesting. I like that thought. What else?
It identifies the time and the date
Yeah,
and
definitely.
how he's trapped inside.
Yeah, that's the big one. So all of these bug-like creatures are trapped in what basically is a cell. So you guys analyzed that really well.
And it has every character on it, like different
Yeah.
styles of face on it.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So just a little bit more background information, which by the way, I didn't know anything about Frank Jones until last week. I was just reading an article about him and I liked it. I thought it was interesting. So Frank Jones was born in the early 1900s with a birth defect. He had a bit of skin covering one of his eyes so that he couldn't open it fully. And back when he was born, having a birth defect like that was like a sign or thought of that you were able to see the spirit world or ghosts. Frank Jones himself totally went along with that idea, and he claimed that he could see demons. And while he was in prison, he felt it was his job, since he could see the demons, to trap them in little cells on paper. So all of these little bug-like creatures are little demons that he saw in prison, and he has caged them in cells so that they could not disturb anyone anymore or hurt anyone anymore. So that is a little bit of background information into him. Now, the big question, do we like him or not? Do we like his artwork or do we like the story?
Both. I like the story and the artwork.
Yeah, why?
I like the fact that he how he brought the vision behind it. Like, you know, he's bringing what he can see to life, and we're seeing basically how he's trying to trap these demons that he sees.
Yeah.
So that it won't harm other people.
Yeah.
I like that he's being considerate.
My question is, if you saw this on the street without having any background knowledge, would you like it?
I would.
Probably not. Probably not.
I would,
background.
to be honest, I probably wouldn't. Because it just doesn't look interesting to me. But knowing the background information, I do have an appreciation for it. So that is just something that this class is designed to try and help us do. If we can analyze the artwork and inspect it a little bit more and inspect the artist and what they're trying to get across to us or show us, we might have more of an appreciation for that. Eric, what do you want to say?
I have a question.
Yeah.
When exactly a prison have artwork? I mean, isn't that for
there's
rehab?
tons of prisoners that make artwork. There's actually something that I just read about today of a prison that is putting an art show on inside. So they do have access to those things. Sometimes.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And slowly but surely, prisoner art is being considered to be slightly more acceptable in the art world. I mentioned kind of last week, you weren't here, but the art world tends to be really snobby and is mostly made up of white males. But slowly that is changing, especially now with all the different movements going on. They're being forced to change and be more acceptable of everyone else, including prisoners.
Oh yes, about last week. Yeah, I wasn't here. Sorry, I had trouble getting in.
I
didn't know.
So.
Yeah, I didn't know the link was going to be on an email.
Yeah, you just need to make sure to watch that YouTube video from last week.
Yeah, sorry.
That's fine. I could kind of tell you were trying to get on. Okay, moving on to this week. Like I mentioned, we're going to be going over principles of design and some of the composition styles that artists need to take into consideration when they are creating artwork. Artists don't just willy-nilly create things. They usually think a lot before they actually make the end result. They practice a lot. There's a lot of trial and error. So yeah, just a reminder that when I go into sharing mode, I don't really see the chat. So if you're typing in the chat, I probably won't see it. So you might want to just unmute and let me know. Hang on. Let me get this fixed and situated. Okay, you guys should be seeing a PowerPoint presentation right now. Starting off with the vocabulary that we should go over in this section and you should know by the end. Just a reminder that the quizzes themselves are very heavily focused on vocabulary and understanding examples of those vocabulary words. So the primary point of this presentation is to go over those words, what they mean, and go over examples. So our first vocabulary word for this section is analogous colors. Analogous colors are colors that are directly next to each other on the color wheel. Analogous colors complement each other very well, meaning they go together really well. Complementary colors are colors or hues that are directly opposite from each other on the color wheel. Complementary colors also go together really well. So an example of an analogous color would be blue and green, and an example of a complementary color would be purple and yellow. And we'll look at a visual of that later on if you're still confused, because it's been a long day. Values are the lightness or darkness of a surface. In this class, well, in all art classes, black and white aren't considered colors, they're considered values or a way to lighten or darken something. They're not colors themselves. They don't end up on the color wheel, so they aren't colors. If you disagree, that's fine. I don't care. It's just an art thing. Linear perspective is the next term. Linear perspective is using lines and mathematical equations and studies to try to get the correct ratio and size of things to try and add some depth and dimension and some realistic looking things to a painting. So basically it's used to make a two-dimensional painting look more three-dimensional. Atmospheric perspective is another trick that painters use to try and make things look more realistic instead of flat two-dimensional paintings. But with atmospheric perspective, it's the idea of things getting blurrier the farther they go away. So kind of having a fog in the background to make things look hazy. Once again, we're going to look at some examples of these in a bit. And our last term is chiaroscuro. That one's super important. Chiaroscuro is using really strong lights and really strong darks to try and add some depth and dimension to a painting, and it adds a lot of drama as well. One of the main artists that made use of chiaroscuro was Caravaggio, who was a Renaissance painter. Chiaro itself literally translates to light, and scuro means dark in Italian, so it literally means light and dark. So a little introduction. A two-dimensional surface. Did someone have a question? Sorry, what?
Really fast.
Oh, sorry, I can go back.
That's why I never accepted some of my letras.
Why?
I had to write it rushingly. They didn't teach me to spoke too fast.
Oh no, I mean.
That's why
Yeah, you just gotta tell me if I'm going too fast.
Oh.
Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and move on now. Just a main topic breakdown, which you should understand the difference of these things already. A two-dimensional surface is a flat plane, such as a painting or a drawing. You can make things look as realistic as possible, but it'll still be flat. A three-dimensional space is something like a sculpture, so you can go all the way around it and see all sides. Those are not super important terms, and like I said, it's kind of common sense. 2D is flat, 3D is not. Painters do try to cheat and make things that are two-dimensional appear to be three-dimensional. And that's where that linear perspective and atmospheric perspective will come into play in a second. The first thing we're going to do, though, is go over all of the different parts of a composition that an artist might take into account before they make their artwork. Those would be lines, shapes, mass, space, time, motion, light, color, and texture. So throughout this particular presentation, we will be looking at each of these and the different ways in which artists used them to create their artwork. A great example of an artist that used all of these things to make their artwork is Daniel Richter's OOA2 from 2011. It is an oil on linen painting. So in this, let's just break it down. I think we can do this together. We have lines and shapes. Can someone unmute and tell us where the lines and shapes are? Don't make me call on someone.
Yes, I can't see whatever it is that you're showing. I can see like other people in the chat, but I can't see what you're showing.
Okay. I stopped showing it for a second and I'll try resharing. And that happens a lot with Teams. So if it's doing that, please speak up and let me know. Okay, now you should see it. Does everyone see it?
I still don't see it.
Is it just you or is it other people?
I see other people.
No, like, is it only you, Eileen, that's having the issue or someone else?
I can see it.
There's a little
I can
small
see the
like
painting.
Yeah,
box.
I just minimized it so that I could see you guys for a second. So it might just be you.
That happened to me last time. I had to get out of the chat and go back into it.
I would say get out and then come back in and see if you can see them.
Okay, I'm gonna try.
Okay. While she's doing that, let's go ahead and try and break this down really fast. So we have a lot of different lines here.
To the right side of the picture, you can see the lines there. Also in the backdrop.
Yeah, there's tons of lines in this.
Yes.
This is super easy with lines. Shapes.
Lots of shapes. Yeah.
This one's really easy to analyze. So there's tons of lines. The shape, the main shape is the dude running and the ground underneath. Our next thing is mass. Mass is made using the black. Like I said, black is technically not considered a color in art, but it does have a lot of weight as a color. Yeah, that's a term that we're going to be talking about a lot tonight is colors have different weights on picture planes. Some colors weigh more than others, and black is the heaviest of all colors, even though it's not really color. Space. So the artist was able to create a sense of depth in this painting by having a black foreground and then slowly breaking up the background with the lighter, hazier colors. And we also have a sense of time. If we notice the paint dripping, you can see implied motion of a soldier running from left to right. There's also light breaking through in the background with the lighter colors, the more bright colors. We also see a lot of bold color use, and there's a lot of texture going on in here with the paint dripping and the graffiti-ish spray paint areas. So yeah, he has a little bit of everything in this image. Like I mentioned, this particular section is going to break down all of the different things needed to make a piece of artwork, particularly a good understanding of how you can use these things as an artist. The most basic of which is a line. So lines are the primary way to make art. It's basic. It's as easy as you can get with a line. You can make them thin, you can make them thick, you can make them swirly, straight, geometric. Lines can imply action and movement. And we're going to be looking at a whole bunch of different lines in a second now. The first of which is Bismarck, North Dakota. So in this particular photograph, we see tons of lines in both the shadows and in the foreground with the poles and the different building pieces. This is, okay, I'm gonna be honest, this is probably my least favorite chapter to teach on, probably because I don't usually make art myself. I just study it and write about it. So I find this to be a little dull. But if you don't, please stop me and chime in if you want to. But otherwise, I will probably be going through this fairly quickly because lines are not that interesting to me unless they are leading my eye somewhere to something more important.
So what are like the future chapters like if this is about like lines?
So we're going to be talking about in this chapter lines, shapes, mass, all of these things. The next chapter is a lot more exciting with the particular, we're going to be looking at why art is made, how to critique art, different patterns and rhythms and stylings of art, the principles of design. But in order to get into the more tough topics, we do have to cover like, what is a line? What is a shape? What is mass? So that's what we're doing with this one, but I found it a little redundant because I feel like you probably know what lines are and what shapes are and what mass is.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah. So this is why I go through this one a little bit quicker because I feel like you probably know. So like I was saying, there are many, many different kinds of lines. There's active and static, aggressive and passive, sensual and mechanical. Yes, lines can be feminine and masculine even. They can imply volume and mass. They can show patterns, depict light, show textures. They can be used for a lot of different reasons. The first of which we can see in movements of colored line right here. So here's a great example of a more feminine, sensual, active line. You can see a lot of movement and motion in these lines. And in juxtaposition to that, we have Rodchenko's Untitled. Here we have a bit more of a aggressive, geometric styling of a line. Both of these are abstract pieces of art too, by the way, in case you were interested. Rodchenko's pretty interesting though. He's a Russian artist from a particular group of Russian artists that we're going to talk about later on. And here is an example of lines being used for light. So in this particular section, we will be talking about several different artists that make use of light. A lot of artists these days are interested in using neon tubing to make art pieces. And they're quite popular with viewers at the moment because they're fun. You light in a dark space. Continuing on with lines can be suggested, such as Sandback's Untitled right here. So this is made with yarn, and we have some suggested rectangles. Obviously, they are not finished. And lines can also be used to denote texture. So we know, because we've seen cats, that they are soft and fluffy, and Kiki Smith has used lines to make every single one of Ginzer's hair fibers. Every single one is a separate line. And line can also be used to denote shapes and foregrounds and backgrounds, like Marc Chagall's I and the Village. Marc Chagall is a surrealist artist. Surrealist artists like to delve into dreams. Every fiber of my being is like holding back from wasting time talking about the art and artists, because I know we're going to talk about them later, but that's the thing that I like the most. Okay, moving on from lines to shape. We're going to be going over several different kinds of shapes. You have your geometric shapes, which are circles, squares, triangles. There's also organic shapes that artists will use. So irregular and curving rounded shapes that would be seen more in nature. And then you have your biomorphic shapes, which suggest like flesh and natural forms. You will also see in a second some positive shapes and negative shapes. So positive shapes are generally in the foreground and more dominant, whereas negative shapes will be in the background. So those are more like suggested shapes, which we'll see when I promise you'll understand when we get through it. It sounds very complex right now, and it's not. So this is your implied shapes right now. So in the foreground, you see the square, and in the background, you can imply there is a sphere around it. That's the use of shapes to imply space. Some more examples of using shapes to imply foregrounds and backgrounds and shapes is right here with Escher's Sky and Water 1. So they used birds and fish.
Oh yeah, I've seen that before. I used to do those. I used to do those in El Paso Community College back where I used to live.
Yeah, so if we point out the ducks, you can still see a trace of the fish, and down here you can still see the bird. And you can also use a more biomorphic, is what this one would be, shape to make art. This is Gross's Untitled. And moving on from shape, we're going to add mass now. Mass can tell us what the weight of the object is. Earlier, I mentioned that colors have weights. Black is the heaviest, even though black's not considered a color, and white is the lightest, even though white's not considered a color. I know it's confusing. Purples, blues, and greens have more mass than yellows, reds, and oranges. That'll be important for us in the next section when we start trying to analyze if something's symmetrical or not. Mass can also be implied with specifically sculptures. So obviously, because of Botero's choice in making this horse very round, it has more mass. We can tell that it must weigh more. because it has more mass. It's bulkier. And in opposition, Giacometti's man pointing is very stick-like, so it doesn't have much mass. It doesn't weigh as much. Is anyone confused with line, shape, or mass yet? I always worry that, like, I assume that this is quite simple, but then someone might be struggling. Lines are just lines, shapes are shapes, and mass is the weight of something. And then, of course, you can see that this particular print has more mass in certain areas. Her face is darker, so it has more mass than this piece of bread, which is lighter. Once again, lighter colors have less mass than darker ones. Space is the next particular piece of art that we need to understand. Space can be implied. Space can also be, in architectural terms, a room. Certain rooms can appear to have more space inside depending on particular architectural features. So, for example, here in Ronald Reagan's National Airport in Washington, the terminal has very tall ceilings. Having really tall ceilings makes someone feel like there's more space. So space is quite literally whether or not there's a lot of space inside of it. Of course, paintings can appear like they have a lot of space as well, depending on how well the artist makes it look three-dimensional. Another example of space is Doug Wheeler right here with this particular installation. So we have a wall with light surrounding it. Light makes it appear like the wall continues on a little bit further, even though it doesn't. It implies more space. Like I mentioned, space can be seen in 2 dimensions as well. A great example of that is the Egyptian painting here on plaster for a fresco, Pool and Garden. So here we have the implication that we're out in a garden and there must be a pool. So there's 2 different spaces here. We have the space for the garden and the space for the pool. That's a very, very flat 2-dimensional representation of space or spaces. Now, speaking of space, we are going to get into 2 of our main key terms, which is linear perspective and atmospheric perspective. Particular object placement can give the appearance of a more, like, there's more depth to something. So, for example, if you overlay objects, it gives the appearance that there's one in front of the other, so there must be more space to the image, as in it goes further back. So, for example, here we have in D, the large circle is in the front, so it must be closer, but the small circle that's at the very back must be further away. So we have implied spatial depth here, or implied space on a flat surface. And that came about thanks to perspective and linear perspective. Another example of that would be Cézanne's Still Life with Apples. We can tell that this lemon is in front of the green apples. By the way, do not look at Cézanne for someone trying to make something look realistic. He is the father of abstract art. So I don't know why they chose him for this particular image. I should not have kept it in. I should have gotten rid of it. But if you notice, the table in the background isn't even finished. The plate is tilted too high up for it to actually stay on a table. Like mathematically, same with the fruit, it should have rolled off. Same with that, it's tilted wrong. But nobody talks about that, so yeah. Anyways, on to linear perspective. Linear perspective was developed during the Italian Renaissance, and we're gonna look at a short little clip of the guy who invented it in a second. Linear perspective uses mathematical equations to try to represent objects as realistically as possible from a real life onto a piece of paper or a painting. Yeah. Linear perspective relies upon lines converging at a vanishing point. The vanishing point itself will end up being at eye level, and I'm going to stop sharing for a second, so you're not going to see the PowerPoint for a second, because yeah, I want to be able to see your faces for a little bit. So, like I was saying, linear perspective. It is along the horizon line. So if you were to look out straight above you, and there's one singular point in front of you that is right on your eye level horizon line, right where your two eyes meet, that is the vanishing point. The easiest way to see those is if you are in a really long hallway with those like ceiling tile things that you can actually see. I think pretty much every single hallway at Midland College has those. If you follow the lines on those ceiling tiles, eventually you're going to get to a point where they get really close together, and that's your vanishing point. And I'm saying that because it's that's probably the most interesting thing about this particular lesson is you can actually practice vantage points and linear perspective yourself really easily. And you can make a mathematically proportional drawing or painting very easily. It's like cheating. So like I said, we are going to watch a little clip about the gentleman who actually invented linear perspective, if I can get my thing to copyright. I haven't used this computer since last week, so give me a second. One second. I know you don't see it yet. It's moving very slow today. I think it's mostly me though. Okay, you guys should see a YouTube video right now. If you don't, now would be the time to tell me.
According to Filippo Brunelleschi's biographer, he stood just inside the main doors of the Cathedral of Florence when he conducted his first perspectival experiment. And that's where we're standing right now.
We're very close to it. Brunelleschi's experiment demonstrated that linear perspective could produce an incredibly realistic illusion of three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface.
So this notion that we can actually develop a system that would be relatively easy to follow, but highly accurate, that could translate the volumetric world that we move through time onto a frozen two-dimensional surface is really an extraordinary achievement. There's some discussion among scholars as to whether or not there was linear perspective in the ancient world, but if there was, it was lost. And linear perspective was created, at least for us, in the modern world by Brunelleschi in the 15th century, around 1420.
Right, and so some people say that Brunelleschi rediscovered linear perspective in case the ancient Greeks and Romans had it before him.
Brunelleschi had gone to Rome and had studied antiquity, and some have hypothesized that he developed the basis for linear perspective in an attempt to be able to accurately portray the buildings that he was looking at, that he was sketching, that he was drawing.
It's certainly something that artists beginning really in the 1300s were creating forms. They were creating human figures that were three-dimensional by using modeling and making the figures bulky and monumental. Then you had the challenge of putting those figures within a believable space. Giotto and Duccio had kind of approximated that space and began to create a kind of earthly setting for their figures, but had not achieved perfect illusion of space for their figures to inhabit.
As the culture becomes increasingly analytical, mathematical, it's a trade-based culture. This is a culture that in some ways may have demanded of its artists a kind of precision, a kind of mathematical accuracy in its representation. And Brunelleschi delivers that. So what does he do?
Brunelleschi creates a perspectively accurate image of the baptistry and its surround.
Right. So Brunelleschi develops a system with just a few essential elements, and through these elements is able to construct accurate scientific one-point perspective. They include a vanishing point, which is at the viewer's horizon line, as well as a series of orthogonals or illusionistically receding diagonals. What Brunelleschi then does is he paints or draws an image of the baptistry with linear perspective and puts a small hole in the center of it. He takes that small drawing or painting, puts a handle on it, and holds it in front of his face, but facing away from him. He then takes a mirror and holds it in back of that. Now remember, his painting has a small hole in it, so he can see through it straight to the vanishing point.
So he's holding the mirror at arm's length and the actual painting with the hole in it right in front of him for his eye to look through.
Right. So he can see the painting's reflection in the mirror. And if he pulls the mirror away, he can see the actual baptistry. And he can bring the mirror back to see the painting, move the mirror away to see the actual baptistry, and see if, in fact, those lines are well coordinated. And it was a very convincing experiment.
Well, I'm going to pause right there because that little experiment with that invention is going to be important for you guys like 3 weeks from now. That is called a camera obscura. And it's considered like the very first, earliest play on a camera.
What Brunelleschi saw in the reflection of the painting looked exactly like the reality that was in front of him.
This would have the most profound effect on the history of Western art. Virtually every painting in the Western tradition after the 15th century is responding to linear perspective, either adopting it or very consciously rejecting it for some reason.
And we're going to stop it there. This is the end result of Brunelleschi's experiment and how he basically made linear perspective really popular and everyone started copying him. So we see the vanishing point. It's right above the baptistry doors, and you see all of the lines go towards that. You'll also notice the people in the foreground are a lot bigger than the people in the background, and the further back you get, the smaller they are. That was thanks to the help of linear perspective. People started realizing that things that are in the foreground are probably bigger than things that are in the background. We'll also see a little bit of atmospheric perspective here in the background. If you notice the mountains really far away get lighter and a little bit foggier. That's an example of atmospheric perspective. But this is the first example of linear perspective seen in art history, at least, using lines with a vantage point to make things more three-dimensional and proportional. Are there any questions about linear perspective? Because that's a really important topic for this class. Eric?
Yes, you said linear perspective was invented by Brunelleschi, right?
Uh-huh.
So you're also saying everyone's been copying his idea ever since.
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and like the video said, it's thought that the Greeks and Romans probably used it way back when, but we don't have evidence of any of their paintings anymore, so we can't be for sure. But you got to keep in mind that Renaissance is a rebirth of Greek and Roman ideas, as well as art styles. So, yeah. Going back to our presentation, and I'll make it big again. Our other type of perspective is atmospheric perspective. It gives the illusion of depth by changing the colors in the background and the hues and making things blurrier the farther away they get. Great examples of, let me just fast forward really fast. Great examples of atmospheric perspective are Asher B. Duran's landscape paintings. The closer that things are, the more in focus they are. and the bolder the color choices are, whereas the further back you go, the hazier things go, and the lighter the color choices are. So that's atmospheric perspective. Another great example of linear perspective, though, is right here with the School of Athens by Raphael. This is 1-point linear perspective. It's right behind these two philosophers right here. So the School of Athens by Raphael is about philosophers from ancient Greek and Roman times, as well as popular philosophers from the Renaissance period and artists from the Renaissance period. Raphael is considered to be one of the main Renaissance artists, which are Raphael, Michelangelo, and Leonardo. Those are the top 3 Renaissance artists. Donatello was pre-Renaissance, for anyone that's really confused right now. Sorry.
Yeah.
So here we have the 2 major philosophers. I'm pretty sure it's Plato and Socrates. Yeah, no, Plato and Aristotle. Sorry. Plato and Aristotle back here. Right here in the foreground is Michelangelo pouting with a block of marble. Michelangelo considered himself to be a sculptor first and foremost, and he also liked to complain a lot, which is why he's pouting. That was mostly what he's mainly known for, was complaining. He surprisingly lives the longest out of all the Renaissance artists. And over here in the corner, Raphael painted himself. Raphael ends up dying in his 20s because he was an alcoholic and liked to have sex a lot. There's the difference between those two. Michelangelo complains and lives to be forever old into his 80s, and Raphael parties and drinks and has a good time and dies in 20. Yeah, so once again, it's a great example of linear perspective. All of these lines will end up going to a point right behind these guys. So like I mentioned, if you pull all the figures away, the point or the vanishing point ends up being here. There's actually a literal horizon line here in the architecture, and that leads to the vanishing point right there. So once again, used to make things more proportional and realistic. Same with atmospheric perspective. Makes things look more realistic, less like a painting. Another example of atmospheric perspective is another Durand, Kindred Spirits. This is surprisingly owned by Ms. Walton, the heiress of the Walmart fortune. She bought this and made her own museum in Arkansas to house her art collection called Crystal Bridges. Atmospheric perspective, it gets blurrier the further away you get. Another example of atmospheric perspective, just a different part of the world, Eastern art, with Shen Zhao. Once again, the further away it gets, the hazier the background is. Any questions about linear or atmospheric perspective before we move on to time and motion? Because like, if there's nothing else you get out of this particular section, that's the one thing I need you to get, is linear and atmospheric perspective. Remember, I cannot see if you're typing in the chat or raising a hand right now. Okay, all right. Moving on to time and motion then. The easiest way to see a passage of time is through movies, which are considered art in a lot of places, in a lot of senses. But you can also see the passage of time through things like the Aztec calendar, which is a calendar, so it obviously shows the passage of time. Or you can see the passage of time right here with the meeting of St. Anthony and St. Paul. So back in the background, he has started his journey, and we can see him traveling along the way until he finally meets, I don't remember which one's which, St. Anthony or St. Paul. I don't know my saints, sorry. I'm not into that. That, and this is not a super famous painting. Another example of time and motion that we can probably relate to a lot easier is comic books. So with comic books, which we're going to talk about several times in this class, you can see characters go through stories. So it's implied that time is passing as the story continues. And like I mentioned, it's easy to see the passage of time with movies. This is a really fun movie, though. This is The Clock. It is a movie that runs on loop for 24 hours, and it's just an image of a clock outside of a train station. On loop for 24 hours, because that's how long a clock runs, 24 hours. And then it starts over, like this film. Some more examples of implied motion this time. We looked at implied motion with the very, very first image of the man running from left to right on the painting. It was implied that he was running. Same deal with the dancing Krishna here. It is implied that Krishna is dancing, but he's not actually dancing because that would be creepy. So we're going to assume he's dancing and hope he doesn't actually start dancing. Here is Boccioni's Dynamisms of the Human Body, footballer. So this is a guy playing soccer because this is Italy that we're talking about right now, and football is soccer for them. Boccioni was part of an artist group known as the Futurists. The Futurists were obsessed with new technologies like airplanes, trains, and cars, which all have one thing in common: they move, and they move fast. So he and his artist buddies liked to make artwork that had a lot of implied motion in it. So this is supposed to be the footballer running, but you can see a whole bunch of legs on him because he's moving that fast. It's implied that he's running. Some more implied motions. We have Jenny Holzer's Untitled, although this one's not really implied motion. It really does move. It plays a poem on loop around the Guggenheim. It's a ticker tape. If you're old enough to know what a ticker tape is, if you're not old enough to know what a ticker tape is, I'm sorry. Watch the news. It's on the bottom. The little reel that keeps playing over and over. But yeah. We're going to look at another Jenny Holzer in a second because she's great as an example of repetition as well. And some more motion. This one's kinetic art. Kinetic art is super important for you guys because it's probably a test question. The artist that invents kinetic art is Alexander Calder, way back a long time ago. And he also invents something called a mobile in the art world. This is an example of his mobiles. His first kinetic art that he ever made, though, was little figurines that he called his circus. It was called the Calder Circus, and the little figurines would do little tricks on their own. Basically a circus for little kids to play with. It was made in the 1900s, and you would take it around for little itty bitty shows on the road for kids' enjoyment. This, however, is an example of one of his mobiles. They react to the air moving around them in rooms. By the way, these are really, really big usually. Some of them are small, but this one in particular is huge. So the air fluctuating around it makes it move. So it is kinetic. Kinetic is a word that means moving. So kinetic art is moving art. And once again, Calder is the first artist to make use of kinetic art. Moving on from time and motion onto light. And then we have color and texture. So light's pretty obvious. There are different ways to use light in art, such as with Daniel Chester French's Lincoln Memorial. So this is a picture of the same exact Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., just taken under different lights. So you can see why light is so important for artists right here. So over here, Lincoln looks happy and friendly and easygoing. Over here, he looks very serious and like someone you'd probably want to respect. So light can be very, very important in artworks and understanding light and how to use it.
Hi, Professor.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I tried to message you on the chat. I have a family emergency. I need to log off.
That's fine. It's totally fine. Just remember your quiz, okay?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
No problem. I don't even know who that was, but that's okay. I don't mind. Emergency.
That was Erica.
Okay, thank you, Anna. I'm like, an emergency is an emergency. This is not as an important thing as an emergency by any means. And I totally get that. And that goes for anyone. If you have an emergency, just let me know and it'll be okay. We can work something out. Once again, moving on, I'm going to move on a lot. Here's a great example of the value of light and dark. I mentioned earlier that black has a lot more weight than white does. This is the perfect example of that. This side obviously feels heavier just instinctually to our eyes than the white side does. And if we were actually having class right now, I would make you practice drawing this, but we're not. This is another example of lights and darks. So here we have Rosa Bonheur's Harvest Season. This is an example of chiaroscuro. Is it the best example of chiaroscuro? No, it's not, but it is an example. So we have extreme lights and darks going on to try and add depth, dimension, and a little bit more drama to what would otherwise be a banal scene or a boring daily scene. Another example of using lights, a bit more obvious, is Saunier's Martyrdom. This is literally using lights. And here's a different form of using light. This is kind of like a reversed image though. It's using the shadows to, yeah, make a piece of art. And this is a film, by the way. So, some more examples of using lights. I'm moving a little bit faster because we need to get on to color. Color is a little bit more important. A lot more important, actually. It's a lot more important. It's really important in this class that you understand the color relationships and how they work together. Certain colors go together really well, certain colors don't. I keep mentioning weight. Weight's going to be really important. Colors also recede and push and pull. Some colors will move forward, some will pull back. That also has to do with the weight. Colors also have meanings behind them, and they can also affect people's moods or represent people's moods. A lot of artists will use colors to try to explain their moods to their audience. There's a whole lot of physics behind color and how color works. Color is technically light refracting off of objects, if you really want to get into the science of that. And every light wavelength has a different color to it. Red has the longest light wavelength, and blue is shorter, so it travels more rapidly. A great way to remember all of your colors is Roy G. Biv. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And here's a great example of white light refracting off of something. And that's not super important for this class, but it is kind of interesting. More important for this class is like what the colors mean, what they represent, and how they work together. So I'm going to skip forward to that part to try and get us caught up. Here's our color wheel. Things that you needed to know as far as vocabulary tonight had to do with analogous colors. Analogous colors are colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel. such as yellow and yellow-green, or red and violet, or red and red-violet. Red, violet, and violet. Those are next to each other. If they're touching, they're analogous. If they're directly opposite from each other, then they are complementary, such as violet and yellow. Those are directly opposite each other, so they are complementary. Or red and green, those are complementary. That's the reason why Christmas colors are their color there. So yeah, certain colors also have the connotation of being cool or warm. Warm colors will generally be on the red, orange, yellow side. Cool colors will be on the purple or violet, blue, and green side. Cool colors have usually the feeling of more sadness or relaxed connotations with them. They also weigh more. Did someone want to say something?
The blue.
What about blue? Oh, blue being sad. Yeah, blue represents sadness. So purple, blue, green, these guys are cool colors. They weigh more, meaning they're going to recede back into the picture plane. Warm colors weigh less, meaning they come forward more on the picture plane. It also just means they're brighter. Darker colors tend to go into the background. Lighter colors tend to come forward. There's a push and pull with colors. Red obviously can mean passion or anger, but yellow usually happy. Red, orange, yellow usually are passionate, happy, bright colors. Green, blue, and violet are cooler, darker tones that will end up going towards the background. And of course, white tends to weigh less and push forward like these colors on this side of the wheel. And black tends to recede back like blue and green and violet do. And I'm spending a lot of time on this because it's a question. So yeah. Any questions about the color wheel? Any questions about warm or cold colors?
Red stands for danger.
Two people talking. One at a time, please. Alex, you're first.
I was saying that red stands for danger as well.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, for sure.
That's one of the colors. Also black, we use black and a little for extreme dangerous.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even animals are smart enough to know not to eat something red because it's usually poisonous. So definitely. Who else was talking? I think someone else was talking.
Yeah, that was me.
Okay.
Yeah, so the primary color are the blue, red, and yellow, right?
Yes. Blue, red, and yellow are your primary colors. Your secondary colors are purple, green, and orange.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Thanks.
If you mix your blue and yellow, then you get green. If you mix red and blue, then you get purple. If you mix red and yellow, you get orange. And then if you add slightly more yellow to your orange, then you get yellow-orange, and so on and so forth.
Yes, I'm aware of that. Thank you.
Yeah. And then if you mix all of your primary colors together, you get brown.
Really? I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. If you mix the primary colors together, you end up with brown. A very ugly brown. But yeah. See? You get a brown. Fun stuff. Colors are fun. I kind of forget that people don't automatically know things with colors because I used to mess around with them so much growing up. But yeah. And if you play with different lights and you put all the primary colors, well, not green, blue, and red lights together, you'll end up with a white in the center. Whoa, I just looked out my window. That's crazy. Okay. I was wondering why it was really windy all of a sudden. there's a dust storm blowing in. So in case you didn't know, there's a really bad dust storm blowing in. It's crazy. I can literally see a wall of dust coming my way. Okay, sorry, distracted. So like Eric and I were talking about just then, primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. Secondary colors are orange, green, and violet or purple. Violet's just another name for purple. And intermediate are the additives of the other colors, so red, orange, so a slightly redder orange, yellow, orange, green, yellow, green, blue, violet, and red, violet. And like I've been mentioning a lot, because it's really important to understand, colors can be warm or cool. The blue-green side of the color wheel is psychologically cooler to us and weighs more and recedes into space, whereas the red-orange side psychologically makes us feel warmer and pushes forward into space and weighs less. So obviously on this one, if you stare at it long enough, the blue will start moving backwards and the red will start coming forward, which is fun, I guess. And here's a great little piece of art there. Okay, like I keep mentioning, different colors work really well together. A lot of times artists will do monochromatic paintings. Those are paintings that are all done in basically the same color, just in different variations and different intensities. So we'll look at one in a second that is pretty much all blue. And other colors that work really well together are your analogous colors, so colors that are near or next to each other on the color wheel. So here's a great example of a monochromatic painting, a painting that's done in pretty much the same shade of white and gray. And here's an example of artwork that's done in analogous colors. And another piece of art that's done in analogous colors. So we have yellow, blue, and green. Those are all analogous. Or purple, red, and green. Complementary colors are colors that are exactly opposite on the color wheel from each other. For example, red and green. And this is just repeating over and over. And I don't think we have any more questions about colors. If you do, you feel free to ask. But we are on to our last important fact to know about making artwork, which is texture and how to add texture to artworks. A really fun example of texture is Merritt Oppenheim's object, Breakfast in Fur. So it's a teacup and a spoon and a saucer covered in fur. That's got a lot of texture. Another example of texture not quite so obvious is the Tang Dynasty flask here. So we can assume that there's a texture to that white surface just because the way it was applied, that particular glaze was applied. Also, you can see the beading on the side that has helped add to a bit of a texture. Other forms of texture can be seen in two-dimensional artwork, such as paintings with impasto. Impasto is a really important vocabulary word for you guys, meaning it's probably a question. So impasto is applying paint so thickly that it has an icing or a butter-like texture on the canvas. So it's so thick that you can see this texture on the canvas from the paint standing feet away, several feet away. A great example of an artwork that uses impasto is the Starry Night. So once again, it's implied paint that's applied very thickly onto the canvas. So if we were to stand against the wall looking at this painting from the side, we would be able to see something that looked like butter or icing on the painting to give it texture. The opposite of using impasto is using very, very fine, thin brush strokes, so fine and detailed that you would have a flat looking surface if you were going to sand from the side like you did on Van Gogh's. The Arnolfini portrait by Jan van Eyck is a great example of that. Jan van Eyck, to make this painting, used a brush with a single brush hair in it to make the fine detail work that he did. So quite the opposite of impasto, applying paint thickly. He applied his paint as thin as possible. So that's it for that particular section. Are there any questions about what we covered already? Okay. I am going to give us until 7:06 for a break, and then we'll go into the second half, which is not near as long, I promise. Go check out the dust storm that just blew into town. Okay, and we should be back now. I had to switch rooms because the window in my living room has a crack in it. So the wind is really, really loud in there. So I had to switch. Okay.
I'm back, baby.
Yep. So moving on, we're going to go on to the different principles of design, which is a lot more interesting as far as analyzing artwork a lot more. And you'll use this particular chapter quite a bit moving forward in the information in it. So, and it's also shorter than the last one. The last one gets a little long with all the examples. But hey, those are things that you need to know. Okay, so moving forward with principles of design. Some key terms that you should know by the end of this section. Once again, going through this particular section, we're going to be looking at examples of each of these key terms. So you should be able to understand what they mean and what they represent by the end. The first of which is asymmetrical balance. So that is something that is balanced but not symmetrically balanced. And like it says here at the bottom, symmetrically balanced things are perfectly balanced or exactly the same or balanced on each side. So asymmetrically balanced sounds like a bit of an oxymoron in the fact that it's balanced, but not really, but it's balanced. And that one has to do a lot with colors and the weight of colors and the weight of objects and mass of objects. So that's the main reason why we had to spend so much time going over colors just now, is so that we can apply that to our asymmetrical balance in a second. Another term is directional forces. Directional forces are particular lines that will draw your focal point to a specific spot. We talked about those last week with Francisco Goya's 3rd of May. You remember the guy in the white shirt with all of the guns pointed at him? Those guns were directional forces. A focal point is a main point in the picture where your attention is most directed. And scale is the size of something in relation to something else. Scale is probably the easiest one to understand. Did you guys need me to wait there longer? I'll wait there a little bit longer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is it quiet in here or is it just me?
I'm giving them time to write those, but yeah, it is really quiet. I moved to the really, really quiet room, so it's quieter in here.
You know, I can think of 2 places that are the quietest in the world: libraries and graveyards.
Okay.
Ha.
What was the second one? After libraries?
Oh, libraries and graveyards.
You're funny. Okay. Moving on. Last week, we talked about several reasons. We're not going to do this because we're running short on time, so I'm not going to do this for you guys. But we talked about the reasons why artists create artwork, such as for ritual and worship, for persuasion, for expression. We talked about all of those. There's 6 in total. You should probably know them before you take your test. Anyways, but two-dimensional artists, well, all artists, like to take into account composition and design before they actually make their artwork. So the reason why they're making their artwork, how they're going to execute it with composition and the design all play into how an artist makes their artwork. All of those things have to come together before we get the end result that we actually see in museums and galleries. So a great quote that sums that all up is that organized perception is what art is all about. So organizing what you're planning on seeing is basically the gist of how artists make art. They have to organize it first. That's a quote from a famous artist named Roy Lichtenstein. Here's one of his pieces. This is Drowning Girl, 1963. His artwork's really fun because he kind of steals inspiration from comic books. If you've ever seen an old-fashioned comic book, you'll know that the images are made up of a bunch of really tiny colored dots. If you actually see a Lichtenstein painting in person, it also has those really tiny colored dots in very organized fashion. So this particular painting is actually made up of a whole bunch of dots, which is fun. Lichtenstein is a pop artist. Pop artists are basically just a fancy word for someone that takes popular images or popular familiar artworks that are easily digestible for a viewer to understand and sells them.
I was wondering why the 60s comics look bad. I'm kidding.
So the different principles of design that we're going to be looking at today are unity and variety, balance, emphasis and subordination, directional forces, contrast, repetition and rhythm, and scale and proportion. And we're going to be looking at examples of each of these, starting with unity and variety. So if you're quickly trying to jot all of these down, you don't need to because we're going through it in order, starting with unity and variety. Unity is pretty simple. Unity is the appearance of oneness or the appearance of being cohesive. This is a painting by Yves Klein entitled IKB Got It. How is this an example of unity? Don't think hard.
Because it's just one color?
Yeah, it's all blue. I chose very, very obvious examples for this entire section. So don't think too hard on any of these examples. They're quite obvious. This one being it is unified because it is all the same color of blue. In fact, this particular shade of blue is called Yves Klein Blue. He patented it. It is his blue, and all of his work is in blue. So if you ever went to an Yves Klein show, it would only have blue artwork. Here's another Yves Klein painting, People Begin to Fly. How he made this is he would hire models to go and paint themselves with blue paint, go lay down or press themselves against a canvas, and he would spray paint around them. And he would actually do this live in front of an audience too. So if you ever want to Google a YouTube video, they're only like 30 seconds long, you can see that happening where he paid people to go and paint themselves blue and press their bodies against a canvas.
Yikes.
Yeah. Here's another example of Bernd and Hilla Becker in using Unity. So these are black and white photographs of water towers. Usually there's about 13, at least 13 on a wall together. They're all the same size. Besides all being black and white and all being the same size, how else are they unified?
Or tall buildings or tall structures.
They're all water towers. So yeah, they're all very tall water towers from around the world. What else is unified?
It's outdoors.
Think about composition, guys.
It's like funneled, like funneling towards the ground, like it acts like a funnel type.
Kind of. I'm thinking more of the placement of the water tower in the picture plane. Where is it?
Right in the center.
It's right in the center, and it's right in the center on all of their photographs. They've done a whole series of these. There's hundreds of them. They're all in the center. Oh, by the way, fun fact, all of the images from tonight, except for like one or two, are from the same museum located in Fort Worth. It's called the Fort Worth Modern. So if you're ever in Fort Worth, you can see all of these in person. So the opposite of unity is variety. Variety provides some diversity to the art pieces because unity can get a little boring sometimes. A great example of variety is Alphonse Mucha's The Precious Stones series. So with this one, we have an example of both unity and variety. With it, you see the woman with the medallion in the background and the flower in the foreground on all of them. However, it's a different flower, a different pose, and a different color and a different design on each medallion. So we have a little bit of unity and variety here.
That's pretty good.
Yep, this is an example of Art Nouveau, which is a French style. Here's another example of variety. So we have similar geometric shapes, all done in different shades. The variety being that they are done in different shades and different sizes. So there's a little bit of unity and cohesiveness, but there's still variety. They're not all identical. Another example of variety is Ellsworth Kelly here, with the dark blue panel, dark green panel, and red panel. So all of these are geometric shapes, all painted one color, but there's variety in the shapes and colors. And going off from unity and variety, we have complete disorder, often seen in abstract art. We will see casually applied brush strokes, a complete sense of disorder and chaos. And a great example of that is Joan Mitchell. Joan Mitchell was actually very closely working with a guy named Jackson Pollock. If you've heard of him, if you haven't, you're going to learn about him this year. But you can see the chaos and disorder and very casually applied brush strokes in this particular painting. This painting is also a great example of impasto, which once again is thickly applied paint. Moving on from unity and variety to balance. This is probably the hardest one in this particular section, Principles of Design, just because people tend to get caught up when we get to asymmetry on color theory. So yeah, but symmetry is something that is completely symmetrical balanced. It is same on each side. It's exactly the same on each side. So if we, for example, were to fold this Mark Rothko painting in half, which would be a horrible decision because it's worth millions of dollars. But if we were to fold it in half, we would find that it is perfectly symmetrical on each side. Another example of symmetry is Martin Puryear's Ladder for Booker T. Washington. The fun thing about ladders is if you cut them in half, they will match up on each side. That's how ladders work. Does anyone know who Booker T. Washington is? He's a really famous historical figure.
No.
No. Well, that's sad.
Scientist. Yeah, something else.
No, but you're close. You're actually really close. Booker T. Washington was a former African American slave pre-Civil War. Post-Civil War, he was freed, and he decided to make it his life's mission to try and advance African Americans in society and make them equal to their white counterparts. He believed that the main way to do that was to educate African Americans at the same level as whites. So that meant going to universities and receiving equal education, which might explain why there's a ladder here. There's a ladder to success, there's a ladder for education, and there is a ladder to try and reach that equality that Booker T. Washington was trying so hard to achieve.
As I realized, I messed up because I was thinking George Culver. Nah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that he's the scientist.
Yeah.
Got it messed up.
I mean, science, education, they go together.
Yeah.
For sure. Another example of symmetry is Cornelia Parker's Endless Column 1. This is fun. It's on the floor if you ever go there. It's a bunch of silver, basically dinnerware items that have been crushed with an industrial press and flattened out. If you were to divide this in half, you would find that it's perfectly symmetrical. So it's equal on each side. Next, we're going to get to the complicated one, which is asymmetry. Asymmetry has a lot to do with mass and colors weighing more or receding, things like that. So I mentioned a lot with the last section that certain colors have more weight than others. The colors that tend to weigh more are green, purple, blue, and black, whereas white and red and yellow and orange don't have as much weight. So because of that, we have right here, if we divide this diagonally, a perfectly asymmetrical image. So on the bottom triangular section, we have the actual image. Because there's an actual image down here, it has a lot of weight, but the majority of it is white and red, which does not have a lot of weight. Whereas on the top triangular section, we have a solid triangle of blue. Blue has more weight, but there's not an object at the top. So because there's an object down here and not up here, technically this one should weigh more, but it's done in white and this is done in blue. So complicated, breaking it down, they're asymmetrically balanced, meaning it's not identical, but it weighs the same, is what I'm getting to in the long roundabout way. I know there's a question on this piece because there's always a question on this piece. So by all means, now would be the time to ask questions on asymmetry.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Or on this piece. You can ask about this piece. I don't care.
Would this be an example of unity?
This would actually be a really good example of unity because it's part of a series of standard oil stations that Ed Ruscha painted. So yeah, if you ever look up Ed Ruscha, he did like 100 paintings of standard oil stations. He went on a road trip and painted every single one he came across. But yeah, it's a great example of unity.
So I wonder if would I be graded on which picture is asymmetric? Like would I have to figure that out, or is that kind of
a very complex question, so I would not ask it in this class. If we were taking like an art theory class, then probably, but not for a basic class because it's hard and it takes a lot of practice and training to understand it. you have to really be in tuned with your principles of design and understanding color theory to really be able to peg asymmetry right off the bat easily. So that's actually a good question. No one's ever asked me that before. Any other questions about asymmetry? Here's another example of asymmetry, which once again is, this one's even more complex than the last one is. So over here we have a solid swatch of yellow. Over here we have white and black. Black itself has a lot of weight, but the white has zero weight to it, allowing this to be a little bit more asymmetrically balanced. Which, yeah, like I said, it's complex. It's very complex. Moving on from balance to emphasis and subordination. This one's really easy, especially since you guys seemed to grasp linear perspective and atmospheric perspective really well. And that's the idea that things in the foreground that are bigger probably are what the artist wants you to focus on versus the stuff in the background. Yes, there's stuff going on in the background, but primarily the artist is trying to make you pay attention to the foreground. This is Lavinia Fontana's Noli Me Tangere, which just means don't touch me. It's a story from the Bible of Mary Magdalene, the prostitute, meeting Jesus Christ, and she says, don't touch me because I'm unclean. And then Christ is like, no, I cleaned you, blah, 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 all that. Okay. Not really blah, 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 but yeah. So yeah, emphasis and subordination. It's just the idea of things being larger or in the foreground or more important than things in the background. So that one's a lot easier. Directional forces, you guys also have done really good on so far. And that is just the lines that our eyes naturally follow and gravitate towards. For example, can someone unmute and tell us who the primary figure in this painting probably is?
The lady with the flag.
Yeah. See, the fun thing about artists who do a really, really good job of composing their artwork is that you don't have to really think too hard to figure out what they're trying to tell you or show you. So the lady carrying the flag is where all of the lines go in this painting. This dude with no pants, his legs go to her. Even this guy's looking at her. His gun's pointing towards her. These guys' eyes are looking towards her. This dude's arm goes towards her. All of the main lines go to her, even the flag. She is Liberty. Lady Liberty used to be represented by a female. And this is an image about the French Revolution. After America fought our revolution, the French also had a couple of their own later on, trying to overthrow different governments. They overthrew a monarchy and then they had to get rid of like a dictator. But yeah, so this is just a painting about freedom and liberty leading the people to freedom. Here's another example of directional forces. This is Theodore Géricault's The Raft of the Medusa. Both of these, by the way, Liberty Leading the People and The Raft of the Medusa, are from the Romantic period of art, which happened in France in the early 1800s, around the same exact time that Romantic poetry was being written. And it's not romantic because it's, oh, we fall in love. It's not that. It's definitely not that. We'll talk about Romantic paintings later on once we go through art history, but it's definitely not romance. Especially not here with The Raft of the Medusa. Who's the main person, or what is the main thing that the artist is trying to get us to look at here?
I will guess the guy that is very in the top with the red white thing, like with the dark skin.
Yep. See, like directional forces. I love these. They're so easy. Yeah, so this, particularly the flag, is actually the main thing that the artist is wanting us to look at. All of the lines go to this dude carrying the flag that's waving it around. Even the dead bodies are laying out to him. Yes, these are dead bodies. So the Raft of the Medusa is a real story that Gericolt read about in the newspaper about the boat called the Medusa ending up in a really bad storm and shipwrecked. The crew ended up trying to live on a small raft for a very long period of time before they were finally rescued. Only a couple of people actually survived. They ended up having to cannibalize each other. It's really gross. It's not a fun story. But the reason why the directional forces point us to this flag is to try and get the viewer to understand that these men are trying desperately to capture the attention of this little itty bitty ship in the background. That little itty bitty spot on the horizon line is a ship. And hopefully their rescue. I always like this guy in the foreground that's pouting. He's interesting to me. Okay, and moving on from directional forces to contrast. Contrast are two opposing or opposite forces placed near each other, such as Joseph Havel's drape in bronze. So this is a bronze sculpture, and here is the sculpture right here. I'm saying that for very important reasons because we're not talking about the background at all. We're talking about sculpture in bronze. Can someone unmute and tell me what a drape is? Normally, what's a drape?
What you hang on your windows?
Yeah, so it's like a curtain or a piece of fabric. It's fabric. So how would this be an example of contrast? A drape is normally fabric. What is this?
It looks like a parachute.
What is this made of? It's up on the line above. And so what is it made of? Anyway.
I don't know. Seems like a representation of a dress or something.
Guys, no. The medium is up there.
That sheet.
Is it bronze?
It's bronze. Thank you, whoever said that. It's bronze. It's made of bronze.
Yeah, the title gives it away.
The bronze is the medium. It's what it's made of.
Oh.
Drape is fabric. A drape is supposed to be soft and movable. Bronze is solid and hard, quite the opposite of a drape. That is why this is the perfect example for contrast. We have something that is supposed to be soft and movable, but is being depicted as hard and solid and not soft. Bronze is not soft. Another way that you could think as contrast would be if you study the background here, but I didn't want to talk about that first. We can talk about it now. This is once again in the Fort Worth Modern Museum, which the Fort Worth Modern Museum was designed by an artist, so the building itself is technically artwork. But here we have a concrete wall on one side, juxtaposed to a wall of windows letting in light. So we have hard and soft in the background as well.
I don't know. Like the other guy said, it looks like a parachute.
It does. It looks like a parachute. It does in real life too. It looks like a parachute. But even so, a parachute is made of fabric and quite the opposite of bronze. Moving on to repetition and rhythm. This one's pretty easy to understand. It's just a repeating thing over and over, such as Jenny Holzer's Kind of Blue. I mentioned when we were going over her in the last section that we talk about her again tonight. So once again, you have a sentence playing on loop, going over and over in the same shade of blue in the same 9 lines. So repetition and rhythm goes really well with unity as well. These are very unified. And once again, they repeat on loop. So it's just the same sentence over and over. And it's a very depressing sentence. So yeah, if you're curious, you can look it up. But it's not a fun sentence. Another example of repetition and rhythm is Donald Judd's Untitled. Donald Judd never titled any of his works, so they're all named Untitled. In fact, Donald Judd never actually made any of his works. He had a factory make them. So yeah.
Wow.
So,
Sound boring.
yeah, he made millions off of artwork that he had produced in a factory. So yeah, it's either genius or I don't know, cheating. I don't know. You either like it or you don't. So we have these boxes with a blue plexiglass front wrapped with steel. And of course, they're all the same blue. They're all the same size. It's repeated over and over and over. Another example of repetition and rhythm can be seen once again in like a comic book theme. But this one is a scroll. When you're reading a scroll, you unroll it from right to left. So it's read from right to left. And it's a story. Particularly this one, this is a fable made for young children. So you would start off on the story on one end and go to the other end. And it would just be the same characters repeated over and over and over as they go throughout the story. Kind of like the comic book that we talked about with the last section. It's the same characters just proceeding through time. So that's another example of repetition. It's a repetition of the same characters again and again and again. And moving on to scale and proportion, that's things and size of things, the size of things in relation to other things. So we looked at in that video Giotto's Madonna right here. It was in the linear perspective video as a poor example of perspective. So here we have a very, very large Mother Mary with Christ on her lap and some really, really small angels and saints in the background. Prior to the invention of linear perspective, artists didn't really know how to illustrate importance. So what they would do is make really important figures bigger or giant-like to emphasize their importance. So that's what Giotto was doing. So this is obviously poor scale and proportion. And our very last image for tonight is probably the most fun Renaissance artwork. This is at the very, very tail end of the Renaissance with Mannerism, which was what came right after the Renaissance period. Artists got tired of trying to portray things accurately and they wanted to take their own interpretation with things again. So we have this particular piece of artwork made from that, which is the Madonna with the long neck. And this one is a lot of fun because you see a woman with an extremely long neck, which is not proportional, and a baby that is bigger than the dude in the background. We're going to watch a little video on this one just because it's fun. And there's so many things wrong with it that I can't really cover all of it in one section. So let me stop sharing for a second and get everything situated again. Every time I change a window, I have to reshare stuff.
So here we're looking at the great Mannerist painting by Parmigianino called The Madonna with the Long Neck. It's a fun painting.
And it's a tall painting. It's big
It's
painting.
big, and Madonna is big. She's big in funny places too. If you look at her head is really tiny.
Compared to her hips, especially.
Right, she's got really, really wide hips, and then she comes down on these tiny little toes. So it's always seemed to me like her body is in the shape of a diamond.
In a sense, she's a landscape on which Christ sits.
Christ himself is also quite large.
It's not just large, but look at the way he splays his body. There's this crazy kind of torsion with his arm falling almost dislocated from his shoulder.
There is a precedent for that way that his left arm falls down. If you think about Michelangelo's Pietà and Christ here as a child, but perhaps echoing when Mary will hold Christ in images like the Pietà when Christ is dead. And in fact, Christ looks asleep, but there's also a way that he looks dead too.
So that reference actually in some ways explains the mass of her lap, because in that sculpture, Mary is quite substantial in order to be able to support the dead body of her son.
It's so clear when we're looking at this that we're not in the High Renaissance anymore.
So what happened?
Yeah, Mannerism happened. It's almost like the artists of the High Renaissance had done everything that could be done. They had perfected the naturalism that they had sought after since the time of Giotto.
So all of the illusionism that was at the service of the High Renaissance is here being used to distort and to transform the body. It's not so much an ugly deformation as a kind of deformation that accentuates a kind of extreme elegance.
Exactly. It takes that ideal beauty and elegance that was in the High Renaissance, that was there, and exaggerates it. And one way of thinking about Mannerism is to think about it as art taken from art instead of art from nature. You know, we think about the Renaissance as being based on observation of nature and the natural world. But when you look at this, you think back to works of art like Michelangelo's Giuliano de' Medici and that long neck, or back to the Pietà.
That makes a lot of sense, the idea that this is art that is self-referential, that is referring to its own traditions.
The respect for human anatomy and portraying that naturalistically, that's not important to Mannerist. In fact, I think there's a letter from one Mannerist artist to another Mannerist artist where he says something like, take a left hand and put it on a right arm. It's like there's a willful complicating of the body.
And setting up relationships between forms that are absurd. Look at the relationship between the vase that's being held by the angel in relationship to her thigh. Look at the relationship between the massive Virgin Mary and the prophet in the lower right corner that is presumably impossibly far away, but somehow just a tiny figure at the feet of the Virgin.
And look too at the way that the Virgin holds her hand to her chest with these impossibly long, almost boneless fingers. There's a way in which the gesture fails to mean anything.
It means gesture,
yeah,
as opposed
to
a specific intent of the figure.
Yeah, there's a kind of dramatizing here.
For its own sake.
Exactly.
For its own sake. That kind of willful compression that creates a sense of almost the impossible. If you look at the columns on the right, there's actually a colonnade that is so deep in space, it's seen at such an oblique angle that it almost seems like a wall or a single column. But if you look closely at the base, you can see the alternating light and shadow that passes between those columns. But there is ambiguity, and that's in large part because that part of the painting is not finished. So Mannerism, it seems to be this intense reaction to the perfection of the High Renaissance. You know, you have the Renaissance, in a sense, building itself into a kind of extreme naturalism, and then it seems to be almost a kind of flailing reaction against those strictures.
Or a sense that there was nowhere to go except to do something really different.
Now, all of these ideas were very much a part of a culture of the court, and I think it's important to recognize that there was a very specific, very learned audience for these kinds of paintings. And so these were not paintings that were made for the artist's own wild interest. This was considered a kind of high intellectual, almost game.
Okay, so that's always a very fun artwork to look at. Today, we looked at linear perspective, which was the perfect example of what scale and proportion should look like. It made things look as realistic as possible on a two-dimensional plane. And then over here we have Madonna with the long neck, which completely throws that out the window and misproportions pretty much the entire composition. So that's just, you can use scale and proportion on both ends. You can use it to play and work in your favor in making something look as realistic as possible, or you can use it as an artistic take on what people or scale and proportion should look like. And that's seen throughout modern and contemporary art as well. Someone has their hand up. Do they have a question? No. Okay. All right. So that is actually it for the principles of design. Are there any questions about the different principles or anything that you guys need me to elaborate on to understand them? Yeah, Eric?
Yeah, those statues and paintings with the long neck, the people with the long neck, with those long neck, isn't that what people call them, pencil necks?
Oh, I have no idea. Those
Me
aren't
either.
made after real people. Those are just artistic interpretations.
Well, either way, I'm just curious. Yeah.
Any other questions? All right. So just a reminder that you guys have a quiz. It's open now. It'll close Friday at midnight. It's over chapters 1 through 4, heavily focusing on vocabulary and examples of the vocabulary. And if you need a review, the YouTube videos can be accessed on Canvas under the announcements page. If you go to the announcements page, there is a link there. I can actually show you guys how to get there, I think. Did I leave that for the, hang on. No momento. All right, let me get there really fast. I can show you how to get to your quiz too. I do believe I did that when people were first coming on. Okay. All right. So you go to your class, and I'm going to go to student view really fast so that I see what you see. If we look here under announcements, and you go to the one that says YouTube link to all class lectures, all of your class lectures are right under this YouTube link. You just have to click it. The one from tonight will be posted probably within the next hour. It takes a bit for it to process and upload onto YouTube. Your quiz can be found under modules, under quiz chapters 1 through 4. And once again, you have an hour to take it. There's only 10 questions. The first 5 are multiple choice. The second 5 are short answer. And they're all based around key concepts and vocabulary. In fact, I think I hinted at a bunch of them tonight.
It's just one attempt, right?
Yeah, it's just one attempt. Gosh, if I gave multiple attempts, everyone would make 100 all the time. Because most of the time, people make 100 on the first try.
No, I think because like if I compare with other course sometimes they let us for 2-3 attempts. So
no, this is a super easy quiz. So yeah. Plus it's open book, open note, and you have access to the lectures to watch them multiple times. So you should be fine. And I know for a fact that my morning class is cheating. So yeah. Because it's easy to do it. I would prefer if you didn't do that, but yeah, I can't get on to you if you do. Because it's online. So yeah, that's it for the quiz. A reminder, your censorship projects are due on the 25th. I know a bunch of you guys are working on those. You do have about 30 minutes left in class tonight, so if you want to work on that now, feel free. I am going to leave this link open until 8:20. for anyone that has questions or wants to work on their group project or anything else. Other than that, class is done for the evening. Next week, we're going to go over how to criticize art and judge it in both positive and negative ways. And we're going to start going over mediums. So yeah, be ready for that. Until then, I will see you guys next week.
Bye, Miss.
Bye.
Excuse me, sorry. I joined class